Welcome to the Legal Innovation Forum podcast series, Leading at the Intersection of Business and Law. In this episode, we welcome Mark Smolik, General Counsel and Board Member at DHL Supply Chain Americas. Today, Mark is going to talk to us about his evolving role and how he and his legal operations team are leveraging AI to drive innovation for the legal department. Mark is also going to share his advice for General Counsel to get started in developing a playbook for innovation. Thank you for listening and stay tuned for our next episode.
A quick note from our podcast sponsor. Tired of dealing with document chaos in your corporate legal department? Let iManage simplify your life. With iManage's powerful document and email management system, you'll have everything you need in one place. Secured, organized, and easy to access. iManage is trusted by 40% of the Fortune 100 and by legal teams worldwide. Learn more about iManage on www.imanage.com.
Welcome to the Legal Innovation Forum podcast. I'm Andrew Bowyer, the founder of the Legal Innovation Forum. Today we're interviewing Mark Smolik, who's the General Counsel and Board Member at DHL Supply Chain Americas. Mark has spent 16 years serving as the Chief Legal Officer of DHL's logistics and supply chain businesses throughout the Americas. He also serves as Global Chair of the company's Supply Chain Legal Services Practice Group. A strategic leader relied on for executing legal, compliance, and business strategies that mitigate risk and drive value, Mark is recognized for his ability to enhance value through periods of uncertainty. Thank you for joining us today, Mark.
Well, Andrew, thank you for those very kind words. I really appreciate it. And it's a pleasure of mine to join you.
All right. Well, thanks so much. So I always like to start our podcast, Mark, with learning a little bit about your career path and trajectory and how it's landed you where you are today. So tell us about it.
Well, truth be told, I didn't want to originally be a lawyer. I wanted to be a doctor. And then midway through my undergrad studies at John Carroll University, my then guidance counselor said, you know what, I don't think medicine and chemistry and biology is for you. I think you ought to go into law. Now, she was a lawyer.
Okay.
And she was pretty instrumental in my career. And I'm glad I followed her advice. But after graduating from undergrad, I went through law school and I worked my way through that, working construction. But coming out of law school, I joined a relatively small law firm in Cleveland, Ohio. And I was one of 3 associates, and there were 10 partners. And I did what most of the partners didn't want to do, which was all the leftover work that a junior or budding lawyer out of law school would handle. But it was about 2.5 years into my engagement with the firm that the Sherwin-Williams company announced that it was looking for a new lawyer to join its team. And Sherwin-Williams is now a global company with over $22 billion in sales. But at the time, it was a public company headquartered out of Cleveland, Ohio, founded by Sherwin and Williams. And I ended up joining their law department in January of 1990. And I spent 13 years there, 10 of which was traveling around the world, doing a lot of international M&A work. And I found it fascinating. But I also found it a little tasking, particularly as my wife and I, who met in undergrad at John Carroll, welcomed our 2 boys into the world. And as they were beginning to grow, not just from babies, but into toddlers, I was all over the world. And we realized that wasn't a life that we could sustain. So I thought about leaving and eventually was contacted by a recruiter to join Safelite Auto Glass down in Columbus, Ohio. And the family moved back in 2003. I stayed with Safelite as the head of legal, HR, and governmental affairs, as well as the ethics office, until we sold the company. And then I joined DHL 16 years ago. And upon joining, we were a law department of 5, and we are now a law department of 92. So it's grown quite a bit. Not just because of the growth of the business, but because a number of other departments or functions have merged into legal along the way. So I've got the privilege of leading 91 other very, very high performing professionals.
Fantastic. Well, great story. And one thing I wanted to touch on, which I think is very interesting, exciting, is your event you are planning, your summit you're planning in a few months' time, the DHL Legal Technology and Innovation Summit, which is June 3rd and 4th this year. You want to tell us a little bit more about the concept for this and what it's all about in terms of the audience and the content and its why?
Andrew, hanging outside our boardroom is a sign. It's actually made out of cardboard boxes. And being a logistics company, we handle a lot of boxes, but it's pretty cool. It's a work of art. And it says everything begins with an idea. And I am an idea person. And it was a number of years ago that I gave a presentation to a group of folks under the heading of Imagine if we had the technology to do this and that, and how it would improve our lives. Now, mind you, this was a decade ago. And many people who were in the audience were thinking, yeah, imagine that, pal, because that doesn't exist today. But my thought was, how is it from a legal provider perspective, can we find a way to do things better, faster, cheaper? And when you are in a law department, in many regards, you find ways to drive unique and measurable value day in and day out. And I have no doubt the audience listening does the same. But you also have to realize your overhead. And you're not making money for the company, except in very, very rare instances, especially in a corporate law department. So a lot of what I have been focusing on over the years is what new innovative approaches are out there, techniques, what new innovative tools in the line of technology are available to help us do things better, faster, cheaper in our organization. And the idea behind the summit is something that has built up over time. But ultimately, the foundation was based on an idea that was about 9 years ago when I asked two of the senior members of my team, generally handling litigation and employment claims, to find a way to organize all of the data we had with regard to all the claims that we have had over the years. And in an organization our size, it's not unusual to have a number of them. But the reason I tell you that is because when I asked them to do that, we didn't have any fancy document management systems that could automatically organize data. We had to organize this data on Excel spreadsheets. But it led to us taking that simple idea and coming up with a way, leveraging a document management system to organize our data in a way that we had no idea what we were doing at the time. We knew we wanted to organize it. And I had in my mind an old-fashioned library where you used to walk in, you'd open a wooden drawer, you'd pull out an index card and tell you exactly where a book was in the library. And my thought was, I want data that is available, that is organized for us in such a way that we can readily find it. Because decades ago, law departments, law firms would open up a manila folder, they would handle a matter, they close the file, and into a file cabinet would go. But you had no way of searching it. But that simple employment idea was the genesis for us coming up with a way to organize our data in such a way that we could extract meaningful information to identify our risks, find ways to mitigate that risk, and to tell us the stories of where we could improve. So as we were organizing this data, we got it to a point where we had tagged it, we had structured it in such a way that as new innovative tools came out, particularly leveraging AI, we now had the foundation to be able to layer those tools on top of it and extract information. And it just happened at a perfect time. AI was really beginning to hit mainstream, really as we were beginning to come out of COVID. And now everybody in the legal industry is talking about AI and wondering, how do I go about implementing and effectively using the tools? And my first answer is, where's your data? Because without it, no AI tool in the world is going to do anything for you. You've got to have the data first. And that was kind of the dumb luck that we had in play because we didn't know what we were doing when we started this 9, 10 years ago. But here we are with this organized data. We have now implemented multiple different AI approaches to streamlining how we do what we do. And we're now referring to AI as not artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence. in such a way that we now have automated intake tools through which information will flow from the business to the legal department. It helps us manage the tasks at hand. It helps us manage our workload as well. But we also have multiple other tools that, if I take the example of the employment claims that I was talking about a little bit ago, Andrew, we now are going down a path of leveraging Gen AI to completely automate the process of handling an employment claim, where when a claim comes in, it will go through an AI filtering tool, and out will come the first responsive brief, automatically prepared based on all the data and all the history of other claims that are in our database. Now, human eyes, of course, will review it, right? But you now have attorneys that have the opportunity to leverage that type of innovation to really be a virtual assistant. So as we continue to develop this, and as we continue to roll out some of these efficiencies, we said, you know what, we got a story here to tell, and we got to tell the industry. So that was the genesis for the Legal Summit. Let's have a law department take its key learnings, invite others who have similar experiences to talk to law departments about the art of the possible. But more importantly, especially as those of us in the legal industry that had the opportunity to go to Legal Week in New York most recently, and you walk through the grand hall of all these vendors, all of whom are doing great work, but none of whom are really focusing the time to tell the buyers of their services, the first thing you got to do before you consider my tool is get your data structured and get it organized. And we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about people, talking to people who are attending, how we did what we did. We're going to share with them the playbook. Here's how you justify it. Here's the discussion points with your finance people about the ROI. And here is step-by-step what you need to do to begin to get your hands around your data, organize it and structure it so that at some point in time, you can layer on all of these augmented intelligence tools to really drive you to the next level in your service performance.
Fantastic. So the question I have about identifying or ideating on a data strategy for a law department, coming up with a roadmap and then executing on that, for those in the audience who may not have the good fortune of being able to attend your summit, if you had 3 or 4 key takeaways for where do you start, what do you start with, and how can that inform a strategy that's scalable, beyond a certain practice area, beyond a certain pain point, to give you that structural foundation of well-organized data, which allows you to do all these other exciting things on top of it?
Yeah. The most important challenge is the commodity that is so precious for anybody really in any industry, let alone legal, in its time. We all go to work, and the 92 of us in our department and the rest of us around the Deutsche Post DHL global legal department are so inundated with just tasks on a day-to-day that it's hard to find the time.
Yeah.
I've had the privilege of building up a legal operations team, so I've got that team. But there are many organizations, law departments, that don't have that privilege. I think the most fundamental thing, whether you are a department of 1 or a department of 1,000, is give some thought first into where is my commodity work really coming from. The targeted operating model of a lot of law departments is almost like a triangle. And you look at the bottom of the triangle and you realize that the vast majority of the work that you do is of a repetitive nature. It's commodity work. It could be a contract with a customer. It could be a real estate lease. It could be a claim or what have you. But look at that commodity work and ask yourself, what is the low-hanging fruit in my department where the issues are similar and they are repeating themselves, that I could, if I had the opportunity, find a way to streamline that by leveraging some level of technology. And once you begin to get your thoughts around just what are the big risks that you're dealing with, what are the types of issues that are repeating themselves, those are ones that are really ripe for leveraging AI tools. And once you have this idea in mind, perhaps do what I did. I went into my CFO and said, I got an idea. That's exactly what I said. I said, don't know how I'm going to execute on it.
Yeah.
I know I'm going to ask you for some money, but this is the idea. And I said, ultimately, I think what this is going to do is going to allow me to leverage a different approach instead of just adding a new body, which is overhead, and adding a new body. But if I can streamline and develop a process that allows people to leverage the data that we have to help them do things more efficiently, the better off that we would be. He said, come back to me with a proposal. I did. But here's the thing I didn't contemplate. And it's perhaps one of the best pieces of advice I've got over the course of my career. He said, when you left that meeting, he said, I knew you were going to come back to me with something. I knew you're going to ask me for some more money. But he said, you left an impression that you're not just thinking like a lawyer. You're thinking like a business person, exactly like I think. You're holding yourself accountable to the same type of standards that he gets accountable to for every dollar that he spends. So as I was talking about that, I was relating to how much money I anticipated it would cost me just to take the first step here. And I said, look, I know in order for me to have a dollar to spend, the sales team has to generate a certain amount of revenue, and that's precious. And I'm asking for that revenue through a number of investments that I would like to make. But eventually I came back to him. I laid out my plan. I said, this is what I'm going to seek to do. This is how much it's going to cost. And he supported it. And it was because we had that vision. Now, that relatively simple investment at the time, which was $43,000 in total, which was not budgeted, which was a big deal for me to get, has now led to other significant investments because we proved ourselves on that first go out the door. And that is the most important first step, particularly when you're trying to justify whether it's your head of finance or to whomever you report, that it's ultimately going to decide whether to give you the money to fund these initiatives than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that jumped out to me, early, and that in your answer that you didn't have a perfect proposal out of the gates. You said, I have a gut feeling that this can work. I'm going to go and iron out and come up with a proposal, but I think that this new way of doing things could add a lot of value to the department and to the business, right? Which is taking a leap of a risk, right? I'm an entrepreneur, so you always sort of spitballing ideas and saying, well, if we did this, if we point in this direction, then we'll make it happen, and it may be something different along the way than we initially thought, and that's entrepreneurialism. So that's an interesting thing when you talk about mindsets of lawyers who, again, are trained really to manage risk, right? Your core function is to manage risk of the organization you're working within, or the organization you're advising, or if it's a consumer, the person you're advising. So how did you make that leap for yourself to say, I'm interested in being a business person as well?
Well, that wasn't all that hard for me. I mean, I started my first business when I was 16 years old, and it was with my brother. We had a kind of an old beat up pickup truck that we got for Christmas one year. And we started a hauling business. So we were entrepreneurs at age 16 and 15. And from there, we bought another truck. He did some things separate from there. I went and worked construction, started my own trim carpentry business, and did pretty well. So the intrigue of the business was always there, always thinking about the customer and the interaction and the revenue and the expenses and everything else associated with it. So always a very, very good steward for money. And that was a little unique, because for those of us that have gone through the traditional law school route, whether you majored in undergrad in history, mathematics, political science, or what have you, you don't typically spend a lot of time in the business school. But I kind of cut my teeth early on in that regard. And having worked for myself through my second year of law school, I still was able to ingrain that literally almost over a decade in the approach to business. I mean, I've had at one point a now retired CFO said, I kind of think you're a better business person than you are a lawyer. And it was a little bit of a joke, but I kind of agree with him. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
surrounded by 91 people that are much, much better at what they do than I do. But when it comes to the business side, um, I've had the opportunity to learn from an awful lot of people. And once I really connected with my CFO here about managing to his perception, then things really started to pan out with regard to the investments that we wanted to make.
Yeah, it's so interesting how these experiences that you have early on in your, life and
Sure.
career and education, they inspire you in directions much later in your career that in ways that you don't know. It kind of forms your DNA in a sense.
Well, you learn from every experience, right?
That's
And
right.
oftentimes you work with people and you say, boy, I'll never do that. And that goes in the, okay, do not do that column. But you find that right combination of what works for you. And as you
Mhm.
do, and as you continue your career, you never forget the folks from whom you learned, especially the positive stuff. And every so often reach out and just thank them for the contributions that they've made to get you where you're at.
Absolutely. So the question I have about this, you're a hybrid business minded lawyer, and it sounds to me, and I get the feeling through our conversation and a previous conversation to this, that you get a real energy out of this entrepreneurial spirit and doing new things and taking risks and adding, sort of on that adventure, that entrepreneurial adventure. And our view at the forum is, we live in a risk on era, and the role and the experience and the way of thinking that lawyers have been trained to do, have learned to do as advisors for businesses navigating this risk on era is paramount. It's a very useful skill. So in terms of melding those two mindsets and experience sets together, the entrepreneurial side of Mark and the lawyer side of Mark, I mean, that prototype is a very, I think, interesting one to dive into in terms of the era that in-house lawyers particularly need to meet, because businesses really rely on them. And I can imagine in the last, throughout your career, but in the last 5 years, there's been all sorts of unexpected challenges you've had to help the business navigate through. So is there anything you can share with us of how you've evolved on that and what you think that an in-house lawyer, needs to be embracing as they, to add the most value, to get the most out of their career and really help their organizations navigate what can only be called turbulent times with challenges and opportunities, of course.
Most important thing that I think folks, whether it's in an in-house legal department, accounting firm, it really doesn't matter, applies to every service organization, is if you work in a business, get engaged in the business. Nobody likes a lawyer. Nobody wants a legal department where the lawyers are in the corner doing something day in and day out, and there's really no engagement with the business. I think what has made my team as successful as it is because they are intimately engaged in the business. They're aware of what the businesses are doing. They're aware of new projects, and they show a genuine interest in learning as much as they can about the business. The more anyone knows about the business they serve, a client, a customer, what their needs are, where they see their own risks, the better off that we are able to react. So take your lawyer hat off and put your business hat on. Put yourself in the shoes of the business people. Make sure you understand what success looks like for them, and come with the attitude of your job. A significant part of your job is not just to understand the facts, that's important, not just to balance the risks, that's critical, but find a way to yes. It's a rarity. Andrew, I can look back on my career and probably count on maybe one hand where I've had to say, I don't think we ought to do that.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because it runs afoul of something that we can agree to contractually with somebody else, but rarely from an ethical perspective, because I think people are genuinely straight-laced and founded on principles of ethics and integrity, especially in this organization where I work. But that engagement is most important. And oftentimes when I will sit in the boardroom where we review performance of different people within the organization, I'll hear a president or a head of a function say, you know what, so-and-so is really engaged with my business. They show a genuine interest. And those are things, remember, you're creating a perception with people. And oftentimes as lawyers, especially when we're young, we think, okay, I just completed 10 contracts, I did a great job, and that's what they're going to remember. No, they're not.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to remember whether you did what you said when you said you were going to do it, whether you did it effectively, and whether you reached out to the team to make sure that they understood what you were doing and why you were doing what you were doing. It's more about the how you do than the what you do. And that is so very important no matter what stage of your career you are in. So I don't have secret sauce. I don't have a magic recipe. I have more of the human interaction of showing that engagement. And if you were to analogize, and every one of us have probably experienced this, you go to a doctor's office and you say, God, what terrible bedside manner. And you say, I'm not going back to them again.
Yeah.
And then you go to somebody who says, nice to meet you. Tell me a little bit about yourself. And then you go back and you say, how's your family? And you personalize it. I start every one of my meetings with my one-on-ones with my people. How's the family? How's his wife? How is Rachel, your daughter, et cetera? And that just shows the connection, shows that you care. And I do with the business people as well. So it's something that's worked for me.
Yeah. Yeah. An authenticity too, right? It's a human.
Try to be, sure.
Yeah. In terms of the AI era that we're in now, right? So I think what's exciting about, obviously you've done the hard yards in the last 9 years with doing this data driven project, and AI, I would imagine for you is probably not nothing, all the hype from 2023 onwards when ChatGPT is just really captured not just as everybody's attention, right? It somehow had that sort of lightning in a bottle effect that suddenly we all understood what AI can do. It's something that we've been talking about, and then you can say, I have a lemon, a piece of chicken, and some Dijon mustard in my fridge. What should I make for dinner? And suddenly that just captured people's imaginations, captured the market's imaginations across all sectors. When you look at the promise of AI and the opportunities and maybe balance with the risks, how do you see this story emerging, given that you've done that heavy lift on the data side, so you can really leverage that technology to your advantage in your legal department? And then for organizations and, broad organization at DHL, where do you see the potential and the transformative potential of AI for the business, for the sector, for the way, that we trade, really? That's what you're facilitating.
Yeah, I see
Give me your
massive
thoughts there.
I see massive opportunity, and massive, very, very positive opportunity. When I look at our business and I look at our IT team in our supply chain business, I mean, for one, it's just run by massively successful people for whom I have the deepest of respect for, but they're not just IT folks, they're IT folks who are very astute business people, deeply engaged with the business, so they understand what is the need, and then they go back and figure out, okay, how can I fill that need? No different than my people. You understand what the goals and objectives of the business are, and you go back and say, okay, this is how I can help you get there. But when I look at the use of AI in our business and the robotics that we are rolling out and the efficiencies that we are gaining and the excitement that I see among even the global board members that are involved, I mean, this is a new beginning of the way a lot of businesses will do business on a regular basis. When I think of legal, I think, in some regards, there's a lot of talk about CLM tools, there's talk about AI. We're still stuck in the 80s and the 90s with regard to how we do what we do. At the fundamental basis of the buy-sell relationship between a corporate law department and law firms, you've got law firms who have their model, and you've got law departments who have their model. And matters will get outsourced to law firms, typically charging on an hourly basis, maybe fixed fee here or there. But that model has been in place for a long, long time. And you've got the potential for technology coming in and disrupting part of that relationship, especially when it comes to merger and acquisition activity, transaction-related activity, or some of the commodity work that law firms handle. I mean, Andrew, think of just the journey that I have been on over, let's call it the last decade, of organizing our employment data, now having it tagged and structured in such a way that our Gen AI tool will actually help us do things better, faster, cheaper. Now, imagine if the law firm did the same thing, where they're leveraging that technology and then passing on those savings to their clients to the extent that you can convince them to do that. But I do believe that we're going to have an opportunity leveraging technology, innovation, and augmented intelligence to change a significant way, some of the way that legal does operate. We've got some initiatives going on right now involving some of our M&A transactions, or certain aspects of our data room review will be fully automated, no human eyes involved, except to double check the work. Think about that.
Yeah.
A tool goes in, extracts all the information out of a data room, and based on fields that you program into an algorithm, which is not all that difficult, you say, give me all this information back. And it does so exactly the way you want it organized in moments of time. Now, imagine taking out the attorneys from the law firm who typically do that work. Now, it's not to the chagrin of the law firms, it is to the benefit of the client to drive that efficiencies. And the more that type of approach is embraced, whether it's on the law firm side or the corporate law department side, the more competitive advantage you're going to have overall. So a lot of this, although it's new, I see we have only begun to scratch the surface. And if I was to put it in an analogy, I think the whole thing about AI is still in diapers. It's got a long way to go, but I'll tell you what, once somebody cracks open how to best structure and organize your data, first of all, whoever figures that formula out is going to make a ton of money. And then the AI tools
will
overlap
really come
on top of that, and it's really going to take off.
Really come, yeah. So that's an interesting case study, an M&A deal. I think you raised some really interesting points. So one is, let's look at the model in 5 years' time, that relationship between a law firm and a law department that's able to do a lot of that work themselves. And it, goes without saying that there's, a leverage model at play in law firms, that having younger, attorneys looking over and doing all that due diligence process and billing hours is very valuable line of business for law firms. So that takes them out of the equation there. However, where do you see that value add from them, with that all being said, and that what you're willing to pay that high rate for in terms of that advice, that guidance? How does that look in 5 years' time if we move to this, as we move to this kind of way of?
Well, it will continue to mature. Yeah, sure. It'll mature and there'll be a balance. Whether or not the technology will supplant the involvement of outside counsel, inside counsel with regard to review of documents and data rooms is yet to be seen. But we're going to go live with this soon. We piloted it, we tested it, we know it works. And, that's within our domain. We worked with a third party to help us develop this, but nevertheless, I think what's going to happen is as more and more buyers of services, the law departments, utilize this type of technology, become aware of it, the more and more they've got a basis to have the discussions with their outside counsel. And if you put the entrepreneur hat on, outside counsel, who hear this and say, you know what? I'm no longer going to be able to bill as much as I used to bill on the data room. But my God, think of the competitive advantage I have, where I can now go into clients and say, look, I can do things better, faster, cheaper. And what used to cost you X is going to cost you X minus Y. because I've taken and made the investment in the technology, and I think you're going to get more deal flow out of it. And the opportunities are significant.
Yeah. And guess what? I work on these across sectors. I have lots of insights, and I can be your strategic partner through that. So how I'm delivering that service and what I charge for it, the model I charge for, that's neither here nor there in some regards, because if the value is there, then
Exactly.
you still be willing to pay for it. If you were a managing partner of a law firm right now, and you're looking at this, because we interview folks from law firms too, and we have lots of panels, and so we hear lots of things, and it's a wait and see, and everything's fine, and you do have a bit of a sense of complacency because certainly in the US, billable, the value, the amount billed per hour has been skyrocketing, right? So you have this dissonance, right? What would you be thinking in that context of a 5 to 10 year runway of what the firm looks like? How do I support my associates who are coming up through the ranks? So of course, I think, there's a talent crunch. If I was an associate in a law firm now and I'd spent all this money on going to law school, it's not quite as sort of guaranteed as it used to be. How would you think about structuring it and moving along with that evolution? Because you still obviously have a key role to play in supporting your clients and perhaps even having other opportunities from other service, taking market share from other service providers that you don't necessarily know about yet.
Right. Well, I'm going to answer your first question first. And that is if I was a managing partner at a law firm. First and foremost, as I evaluate either what I hear, what I read, what I'm told about AI in the legal industry, I would be thinking to myself, I am not going to let happen to my law firm what happened to Blockbuster Video. Blockbuster ignored Netflix. Netflix was like the AI coming in, right? No, never going to happen. Who's going to return that disc? And of course, then it goes mainstream, right? As technology improves itself, and we all know what happened to Blockbuster. So I'm not saying that is the analogy that is applicable here, but law firms will always have a place, I believe, always have a place for, I can't even begin to imagine how long, in servicing external clients. And it's been here for centuries. It will continue that way with regard to that business model. But if I was that managing partner and I did not have a strategy as to how to embrace and leverage technology to the advantage of my clients, I'd find myself losing out on multiple opportunities in the future because technology will blow right past you. And if you don't have at least a mindset to find a way to understand it and embrace it and then leverage it to the advantage of your clients, you're going to have a fundamental challenge with your business model going forward. But as I say this, Andrew, there's a part of me that even with my own law firms, when I ask them, what technology are you using? And they light up and they say, we're using this and we're using that and we're doing this and we're doing that. And I'm like, I'm not seeing it in the bills. I'm glad that you're doing that to maximize your efficiency, but I haven't seen a dip at all. In fact, what I see is the 13, 15, 18% annual increase requests that you ask for year after year. So I do think, flipping your question just a little bit, if I was that managing partner and I was asked by a client or two or three, what are you doing to leverage technology to help you do things better, faster, cheaper for me? And how can I measure that? I'd be thinking of a way to say, you know what? Instead of us using technology, as I understand it, from not only my law firms, but multiple other GCs with whom I've had conversations about what they're hearing from their law firms, is technology is being used to help the law firm do things better, faster, cheaper. And it's helping them internally. But for me, I still question as to how it is helping me externally with the law firms and what have you. So embrace it, because I think if you don't, you're going to find yourself at a significant competitive disadvantage.
To what extent do you see law firms embracing that?
Well, I think there's a mindset. You look at the AmLaw 100, and they provide an incredibly valuable service, and so too does everybody else, right? There's always going to be the must go to bet the company law firm that I need your services. I'm going to pay whatever those services are. And some of that's also true in some of the major transactions where you've got multiple parties around the world and big banks, et cetera. But Andrew, from my days when I was chair of the ACC Law Department Management Network, and I had frequent interaction with many, many, many different law departments around the world, mostly in North America, though, 80% of the work we do is basic blocking and tackling. It's contracts, it's review of this, it's a little bit of advice here. It's an employment claim or litigation claim. It's not the big bet the company stuff. It's not the major bankruptcy stuff. But the ability to really understand where the work is coming from and what is the high value, what is the high risk, where I really need the law firm to do that. But what is the lower value, more commodity type work? And I spoke about this earlier in our discussion here. But the more of a mindset is to begin to understand where is your work coming from and how are you managing it? I think the better off that you're going to be overall.
Fascinating. It's going to be very interesting to see how this legal sector ecosystem evolves in the next decade. I think even faster, the next half of this decade, because I think it's moving very quickly and you have lots of drivers behind that.
You do.
So it'd be interesting to check in a year or so. So I know we're getting towards time, Mark. So I just want to wrap with maybe to the audience again, if some top tips of, meeting these times and being an innovative lawyer, business person, risk advisor in them. If you had 3 takeaways for folks, for them to adopt, the mindset that you have spent a lot of time thinking about and, developing in your own career, in your legal department, and in the way you work with the business writ large, that would be great.
Mm-hmm. Well, number one, depending on, it really doesn't matter what level you are in a law firm, law department, accounting firm, it really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we are a service business, and finding a way to connect on a human level, a professional level with people that you are servicing is the most important. Show an interest. Don't relegate yourself to the corner just to do the work. Oh, there's legal. Legal needs to earn a seat at the table. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens by handling the basic blocking and tackling work and doing it effectively and doing what my CFO recommended me many, many years ago when he said, manage to perception. I walked out of a meeting with he and the CEO, excuse me. And about a week later, when we had a follow-up, he said, you know what? I know you told us you were struggling with preparing board reports because we were under a mandate. You come in with the same type of report every single month. And in legal, I was reporting on the same things every month because if it's a litigation, sometimes it could take years. So I asked my CFO, well, what do I do? And he said, you know what? Stop the reports. Because when you walk out of that meeting that you walked out of last week, we looked at each other and we said, that guy gets it. And that's our perception. And that is invaluable to you, Mark, because we're not going to remember what you did on this litigation or that litigation, but manage to perception. That's a big tip, Andrew. It's worked for me. Never forget it. And it doesn't matter the level. Manage to perception. Number 2, remember the most valuable thing that you walk around with you every day, every second of every day is your name. And your name says who you are. There's a perception about that. It conveys a message before you walk into a room, pick up a phone, or you talk to somebody. And hopefully coming with that name is integrity, ethics, and somebody who does what they say they'll do when they'll say they'll do it. And that becomes reliability. And number 3, no matter where you are in life, whether it's brand new out of school or ready to retire, never forget the people who supported you in getting you to where you're at. You started the conversation with regard to the legal summit, and you referred to it as my legal summit. And I appreciate that, thank you. But it's not. It's a culmination of a lot of work by a whole lot of people that will be recognized when we have the opportunity to kick this summit off in June 3rd and then on June 4th. But it's a people business, and at the end of the day, treating people with the same respect that you want to be treated with is most important. So never lose sight of the human element. So those are my top three. I could probably give you a dozen more, but those are the most important.
Fantastic. Well, Mark, really enjoyed our conversation. Good luck with the summit. And I think, there's no I in team, right?
Right.
It does take, and we put these things together and we have a large team. So I know there's a lot of moving parts, and really enjoyed our conversation today. Thanks for spending time with us.
It was an honor for me, and I really do appreciate it, because it's not just me, but it's the team behind me as well. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you for tuning in to the Legal Innovation Forum podcast. Stay tuned on our website for the next edition. You can listen to us on all your favorite podcast platforms. Tune in on liforum.co/podcasts.